Hey, it's Jim Peak here, and I'm welcoming you to the AI Easy as Pie podcast. And on today's show, we're going to talk all about AI and help you really imbibe the fact that it is easy. It's as easy as eating a piece of apple pie, which my mother in law just made for me tonight. So I'm just still enjoying awesome apple pie. And on today's show, we have my wonderful friend Ben. Ben, tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Ben. I've got 4 kids, live here in Utah, and all my kids use AI. Yes, they do. My 11-year-old, it was using it the other day. What's the most expensive house in the state and how big is it? And I was like, why do you need to know that? But he loved it, entertained him for like a whole hour. And and then I have a daughter who uses AI to help her do her book and authoring. And so she'll take a paragraph of what she wrote, said, help me improve this, give me ideas, or I want to say this, but word it this way. Another one will use it for making images for our YouTube channel. And my wife, I'm like, oh, I got to keep up. And so yeah, and then my background, I'm in IT. I've been in IT, well, really since I was 11 years old. And I learned how to program HTML when it first came out. My grandpa said, if you learn how to code on the internet, it's like me when I learned how to fix telephones when they first came out, and you will have a job for the rest of your life.
So
And
you
little
learned
did
when
I
you were
know,
11?
yeah, when I was 11. And
So
he's
that
like,
was
you
like
need
what,
to learn
30
this
years
new
ago?
thing. Because if you learn this new thing, you're going to have a job for the rest of your life. He learned how to repair radios and telephones when they first came out.
Yeah.
And he was valuable. And he ended up becoming a Stanford professor.
Wow.
And he helped blow up atoms and help work with the people who discovered quarks. And so
Oh,
by him saying, what's the next new thing? Let me learn about it, led him to a career that has influenced the whole world, right?
that's so cool. So you were inspired by that. What year was that?
It was in the early 90s,
What?
91, 92.
You were before me, and that's so cool. I learned about it in 1995, 96. So that's so cool. You just jumped right in.
Yes. And so that's when they had a website and you could program HTML. And I built a whole computer with my dad.
Wow.
We plugged it all in because I started homeschooling. And in homeschool, you do whatever you want. And at the same time, you can be really creative and do
Right.
different things you wouldn't normally do. So I'd had like a selling business. I bound books and sold in the bookstores. I did video editing for my dad's business and did all his IT support. And so I learned a lot of things. And then the encyclopedias sat on my shelf as a kid. And I would read all the encyclopedias because, before the internet and Google, that's how you learn things. You go read the encyclopedia.
The encyclopedia. I totally remember that.
Yes. And that, so that kids, what that is, it's a book
Yeah.
and it would have words in it. And you couldn't type in the things from Google. You had to turn to the right page.
Do you remember going to the library, talking to the reference librarian?
Sure.
And, she might look things up on microfiche.
Yeah, we had to write down all those numbers. So I had one librarian that was amazing. She sang in this really famous world choir
Wow.
in Salt Lake City, and she was just so loving and caring. She loved homeschool kids, and she would always like personally recommend and select books.
Oh,
And so like she was like, "Oh, you got to read this book. You like this genre." And it was like she was doing like psychic readings but for books. And you're like, "It's amazing. You know my soul. Thank you. I'm
mm,
only 10 and I probably is easy to read as a book, but thank you." And so that was her. And so then fast forward, I was in college confused at where to go in my career. And then finally the economy in 2008 crashed and I had graduated. I had, my wife was pregnant and I lost my job. And they're like, Friday, they called me up on the phone. Don't show up Monday, later. No explanation. Like,
just out of there.
yeah, just out. And
Terrible.
so I was hoping to go job. I went to a church service project and I ended up getting a job at a refinery.
Hmm.
And they're like, oh, you're good with computers. How about you be our database clerk? But before you knew it, I was programming it. I was teaching people how to use the software. I was figuring out all the things about it. And even getting heat from some of the other guys like, you need to go to college for this and do all these things. And I'm like, well, I can do it.
Here, I'm already still. Yeah.
And so then I went back to school and got my MBA and master's in IT. I've always been in this kind of interesting position where I've always lived between two worlds. I live between the business world of the people who are in pain, who are living it and trying to use the tool, and the IT world that is like very deep in all the details, but sometimes forgets that there's a real person on the other end.
Right, exactly.
And so that became my special power, was how to connect two worlds.
That's great because you definitely don't remind me of the stereotypical IT person.
No, I'm not at all. I'm
So,
the opposite, and I tend to stir things up.
so this is really fascinating, and it leads us right to this AI development because we're talking about librarians and people who have really influenced us and the way it was in the old days. And this is just so much change going on. So, how did you find yourself into AI? How did you find yourself utilizing AI in your work?
So a few years ago, cloud was the next new thing. And I always like to learn the next new thing because that gives me opportunity to lead and to change
Yeah.
and to be more in control of the change rather than reacting to the change later. So I love to be on the cutting edge and to lead and to change. And what is that change? The good side of change is I get to help people live in a different quality of life if I lead the change. If
Yes.
I wait for change, I don't get that opportunity to lead and to create the kind of change I want to see.
Totally.
Yeah. So AI came out a few years later, and I was in the cloud group at my corporate. There's about 1,000 of us in IT. We support a global nonprofit throughout the whole world.
Wow.
Before that, I was in oil and gas for about 15 years, and they used a lot of old technology, and they wouldn't get the latest and newest thing unless you were
Yeah,
like,
go figure. I was motivated.
oil's more important. If oil's running in the pipes, okay, we'll pay for your computers. If there's no oil running, why we need to pay for computers? So that's kind of how it felt sometimes. So I hear of this company, and my friend Joe is over the kind of data analytics group and some of the AI committee. And I started realizing we had a lot of business leaders talking about the perils and the blessings of AI. And they said the only way that you can utilize the blessings or the benefits is to understand the perils. And so you need to understand both. It is not like it's just everything's great and
Actually,
it's not like everything's horrible.
yeah.
You need to understand real perils and real benefits.
Mhm.
And I'd kind of become obsessed with the healthy side of technology and the unhealthy side of technology, being kind of getting addicted to my phone early in my marriage and going, okay, I got to change this habit and behavior and use
Yeah.
it in healthy ways. And AI is going to be the next social media or phone of encouraging healthy behaviors or more unhealthy behaviors.
Right, exactly. It could cause people to be more distant and not present with their significant others, or it can cause them to have the most amazing relationships.
I started seeing this AI change and I'm like, this is interesting. And I think the first thing that was really helpful was one day I used ChatGPT and I just complained to it because I was like, a therapist or a coach is expensive. And I wanted to just like talk for another hour to my coach or therapist, like, oh, well, I'll have to charge you. I'm like, can I write you an email? They're like, well, if it's short, and I'm like, I got to figure out how to solve my problems because, I can't just vent on my wife all the time because
Yeah.
that's exhausting for her.
Another
And I'm like, I
problem.
gotta find a better way. And so one day I was like, Chat GPT, and just kind of complained about patterns. And I said, Chat GPT, I have this pattern when I go on vacations and blah, 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 blah. And I just like vented
Yeah.
for 20, 30 minutes. And they said, now help me figure out the underlying pattern. That's the problem to why we have a hard time on family vacations. And then it goes, oh, well, you have a problem in your morning routine because you don't have a morning routine. You're feeling so out of it that people get triggered or frustrated, et cetera. And I'm like, that's exactly the problem. That saved me the therapist. It saved me my wife venting and like driving her nuts. And it taught me how to process with my journal my feelings and thoughts better.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
so
amazing.
when I had that breakthrough, it was like, what else could I use this for?
Right. Exactly. And whenever we talk about these kind of things, I'm always like, oh, should I shy away from saying, God, it was such a great coach for me that time? Because I don't want coaches to feel threatened. But the truth is, it really can enhance and empower your work. Like a loved one called me tonight. And so while we were talking on the phone, I was just quickly typing in ChatGPT? What would you say here? What would you say there in, my pre-configured kind of coaching custom GPT?
Yep.
And it was giving me all sorts of ideas. It was saying, okay, maybe go gentle in this part. And, here's a clarifying question to ask. So it can be
I
a
did that in a coaching session. We were dealing with a particular negative pattern and a negative speech and affirmations and thoughts in their head. And I didn't have the language in my mind, but I knew what needed to happen. And so I knew the intention. I just typed in that chat GPT, this is the intention. These are the kind of words. We need the opposite pattern and we need it to be inspiring. And I want a metaphor. And I told the person the metaphor and the positive words, and like, oh my goodness, that was amazing. And so I didn't have to interrupt our flow. I didn't need to like,
right.
let me have another session and we'll spend another 30 minutes. It just like,
Yeah.
I got there as fast as I could type. And the person's like, that was amazing. And I didn't try to hide it. I said, yeah, I used AI, but they loved it.
That's great. There are moments sometimes, someone might be really in their story and you can just really quickly, like a few keywords and get the redirection. And then it helps everyone.
Yeah.
You also inspired me, Ben, to remember probably my first real time, like you said, that light bulb moment when you were like, I needed a coach. Mine was, I remember I really love Simon Sinek's work about purpose and finding your big why, finding, your real motivating reason. And he talks about, look at all the stories of your life and then analyze all those stories and look for themes. And that's a lot of work. So I put all into Chat GPT and said, what are the themes here? And then it came up with all these themes. I'm like, yeah, that's me.
One of my dreams is to build a personality chat GPT that can take these different coaching models and
It's a
work
great
in
idea.
tandem with a person and work in tandem with a coach to help them kind of refresh, like, well, I know your concepts, but how would I apply it here? Or
Yeah.
I know what they would say, but what do I do in this situation? Like, how could I think it through?
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of my philosophy. We have two minds. We have a material analytical mind and our spirit mind. And we're given the opportunity now to focus more on our heart space, our spirit mind of like, this is my intention. And now I have more tools to analyze things quickly so I can serve those higher intentions.
Exactly. That's exactly it. If we can take care of that sort of analytical human mind, and that's how I equate it too. We both share a lot of deep love of the heart, love of the spirit. And I think about that term AI, artificial intelligence. I don't like that term. There's nothing, it's a good marketing term. It's very soundbite friendly, but it doesn't make it very real because there's nothing artificial about it. And it's really intelligence and
It's more just processing power.
exactly like what happens with our, what's going
Yeah,
on.
it's like math problems and patterns, but it's not. I think if we teach it patterns, they can imitate those patterns. But there's something amazing about the human soul and intuition and
Yeah.
connecting.
Yes, exactly. Like,
And so I think we're going to start asking more questions in the coming days of like, well, what's consciousness? What's human connection? What's intuition?
for sure, especially when some of the best minds are saying singularity is coming. And that's when, AI has consciousness. And whenever I hear that, I'm like, do you know what consciousness really is?
And that's what we're going to be talking about a lot.
It's going to be one of the many conversations that we get to have when AI and AI agents are doing our work, off to the side.
I think we're going to get lots of opportunities to shape what that becomes. And
Yeah.
so I started with that, and I'll just share one other example. That's okay.
Of course.
So as I started learning how to use this chat GPT and create images, it helps me write better. I've always struggled with writing,
Mhm.
but I know what I want to say. It's just really hard to process.
Yeah.
It sometimes gives me headaches,
Mhm.
or I have to read it over several times. And when I did my master's, I got a lot better at writing, but I usually keep it very simple
Yeah.
because it just like would take a lot of mental effort.
I think a lot of people underestimate how much energy that takes to do it. So you were looking for help.
Yeah, and so when I write my blog articles, I'll take a transcript to something or an outline of something, and then I will kind of polish it. Then I'll edit it some more, then I'll polish it. And like, well, I want to say it this way, or like I want this tone.
Mhm.
And so underneath, it's all my original ideas. I talked to a teenager the other day. I'm like, hey, what do you think about AI? Oh, we can't use that. That's cheating. I'm like, what a poor way to approach a tool.
Yes,
They're just
exactly.
saying, well, you're not allowed to use it. And I think what's I learned in homeschool was you need to do the learning and it always belongs to you, but you can do it in so many different ways. And so I
Right.
wasn't accountable to passing a test. I was accountable to me knowing it by heart and by learning whatever way I could to get there. So I would go look at the back of a math book and look at the answers, but I didn't look so I could complete
Yeah.
my assignment because there's nobody checking me. There's nobody grading me. I looked because I was trying to figure out the pattern. I was like, oh, what's the fastest way to learn that pattern?
There you go.
And so I'm like, why read the whole thing when I can just look at some answers, figure out the pattern? I'm like, oh, no, the formula done. And so I don't need to spend a whole hour reading it so slowly,
Yeah.
every little detail. I'm just like, give me the pattern. Let me learn. Let me move on.
Oh, that's awesome. I think of like framers in construction.
Mhm.
Are they cheating for using a power nailing gun?
Totally.
We gotta get out of hand.
Yeah. I mean, that is so wimpy. I mean, come on, be a real man.
Yeah, I can finish it in like 1/10 of the time, maybe even 100th of the time, and get back to my wife and family.
Yes.
Hey, I feel guilty because I'm cheating.
Oh. And I think that when you come from a point of view of like wanting not to do the work and not wanting to grow, that's cheating. But when you're pointing from the view of like, I'm going to be transparent, I'm going to grow, I'm not going to try to cheat growing, I'm going to try to cheat spending so much time on something that doesn't have to be done that slow way.
Right, exactly. And it goes back to then what we were talking about before, kind of AI for good, AI for not so good. If someone is a cheating slacker in high school, copying and pasting, before they were just copying and pasting Wikipedia articles. Now they're copying and pasting ChatGPT responses. They've probably heard this many times and they probably roll their eyes at it, but they're only cheating themselves. That's what we're working to overpower with our AI for good. The more we can empower people to use it for what you were talking about, finding those patterns quicker, getting to the aha moment quicker, or helping somebody else out quicker.
Yes. And so I think that's some of the things I've learned to use it. I think the other thing that's been very helpful is seeing blind spots. So I think a journal is an incredible tool for overcoming your ego and not getting in arguments with other people. Cause then you look at it, you're like, well, there's the data. I can't argue with it. I did that. It's a pattern. Or, oh, they did that. Here's the pattern. And with I used it for like, I was planning my morning routine and I was like so excited. I'm like on fire. And maybe my personality is like a little extreme. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna live this morning routine every day. I'm gonna be so consistent. And it's like, and then it said, well, maybe you should consider a micro routine on your hard days, and maybe you should consider a little bit more variety in your routine so that it doesn't become too boring. Since you struggle with some ADHD, and I was like, oh yeah, yeah, that's true.
It helped you see that blind spot.
And so then on my there, I say, so I have my morning routine when it's like everything goes great. And then I have, but I'm grumpy and it's Monday routine. And then I have my micro routine, which is I just do three things.
Three things, and then you can feel a sense of accomplishment.
And so I think it saved my effort of like having these conversations with my wife or someone and getting into the game of like blame or frustration and like, oh, well, you're trying to make me face my issues. And now I can just go, well, either I'm going to look at AI in the face and be like, ha, I don't agree with you and know that I'm a total BSing, or I'll be like, that's something to consider. And since you don't have feelings, I don't need to worry about offending you.
I love it. They always say that AI is non-judgmental. You can fill out your drive, but you're also pointing out that, it also, you can't argue with it. It's like, yeah, I did do that. You're right.
And so I think if you treat it as like a journal instead of like a person, I had this game as a kid called Dr. Spatzo, and it was a therapist. And when the Sound Blaster sound card first came out, it was like real sounding human speech on a computer. It was a big deal. And I don't know if you remember, it's like, hello, I am Dr. Spatzo. I'm here to help you. And it was just a terminal and you type in like, here's my problem. And we would try to trick it or like come up with more problems for it to solve. And I remember one time it's like, I'm sorry, I can't help you with your problem. Like, please exit the program. We were laughing. We're like, but it kind of like got me thinking because it would ask you these questions and help you go deeper. And it was a funny game that we played as kids. But I think if we see it as a tool to be more responsible and accountable versus unaccountable or sneaky, right?
Exactly. Yeah. That,
So,
that's the whole crux of the matter.
and I think it also helps me process like flaws in my thinking quicker, or like how would someone else understand this, or how might this come across? I love how it helps me think from other people's point of view or perspectives, and then also find common beliefs. Like, what's a common way to look at that? Like sometimes, for example, like Christian and Buddhist, or like political party A or B. Sometimes we get so lost in language, we forget what the essence is about.
Wow.
And so I'll say, well, what's the underlying essence or what's the common thing? And describe it in different words in this vernacular. Describe it in Christian vernacular. Describe it in corporate speak. Describe it in this way. Describe it in a metaphor that a third grader could understand. And then I'm like, you know what? This is all the same thing. Why are we arguing?
That's awesome. Okay, I have a question for you, Ben.
Yeah.
And if you've already answered this, let me know. What's one thing that you used to hate to do that now you use AI for, and it's like just, it handles it for you, and maybe even you're saving time?
I'll go through three things. One is I love writing blog articles with it because I feel so proud that it's clear and it's what I actually wanted to say.
Oh, that's great, because your blog articles are fantastic.
Yes, and I'll edit them, and I don't let AI do it all, but it helps me feel like I can actually run. It's like
Yeah.
I was walking barefoot, you know, over these rock paths, and now I have running shoes, and it's just like, oh, I can run. I can finally do what I've always wanted to do.
Yeah.
I think the second is I'll put in my transcripts or homework for something, and I'll have it answer a question, and then I go, why did it say that? And then I ask another question.
Yes.
And then I start getting more curious. It's like, oh, that would have taken me a while to get there. And I don't stop with the immediate answers. I go like 2 or 3 more levels deeper, or I will ask it some questions like, give me a summary of all the people and their questions. And then I look at it more like zooming out, going, ooh, I can see a pattern. Cause usually I'd be so lost in the detail.
Exactly.
So I wouldn't see that. And then the third, I think, is
If you haven't used Google Notebook LM yet, that's another really fun way to do what you said for number two.
yeah, I have to check out that one. I've been using
my goodness.
ChatGPT a lot and Otter and something else.
Those are all great. And ChatGPT, of course, is fantastic. And for anybody who's watching or listening, you can create custom ChatGPTs that are really cool. And Notebook LMs from Google, I kind of like those custom GPTs. But when you do them, then you can then, with one click of a button, create an audio podcast of all that material that you put into it. Amazing. My brother flipped out so much that he's already made like 60 Notebook LMs, ranging from music theory to advanced mathematics.
Oh, there's another one. I did a music with an app called HookPad, Hook Theory, HookPad,
Okay.
and it'll use AI to help you find which chords and notes will sound good together.
Oh, that's so cool.
And so Berkeley put like thousands and thousands of songs into a database.
All right, cool.
And then they studied popular chord progressions. And so it started out, it just would suggest to you, like, here's the top 10 chords, or here's what chords will sound good with the next progression. So then I started learning patterns, like, ooh, I like that. Ooh, I didn't know that one existed. And now it'll even suggest what kinds of melodies will sound good with that, or what chords. It'll give you like a few bars. And I was tinkering with it. It was really fun to start like expanding my palette of patterns. And it's like, ooh, yeah, yeah. And then so I started analyzed Billy Joel's new song, and then I looked at the chords and I'm like, oh, and I started making my own version of it.
In my attempts to learn music, I was using one that would listen to a song and tell me the chord progression. So I just wanted to just play around and kind of do the little riff or whatever. I could use that.
I think writing articles, as well as whenever I feel like I can't language, I'll use it to help me debug code. I used it to help me with a software training to improve the outline or the clarity. Like love using it for like, how do I simplify, make it more concise, more
Yeah.
clear, less words at work. That's what I love to use it for.
That's brilliant. I mean, it helps everybody out because you and I share that in common. We communicate in a way where it's easy for us to forget to get those step by step, kind of clear details. So that is a fantastic pattern. Okay. How about this? What's a business or personal challenge that you've been putting off that, you think AI might be able to help you with?
Well, my coaching business, I've been putting off making an offer and figuring out how to charge clients.
Yes, it could definitely help you with that.
My personal life, I think there's a few habits like spending time on my finances that I just were boring or just off putting.
Oh,
I'm like, "Ugh, I don't want to do this."
you're preaching to the choir.
The other one would be planning a family vacation. We
Oh,
have a
that's
lot
so
of different
fun.
requirements for my family. Like they like this, they like this. I thought of two things. One is talking to a travel planner,
Mhm.
and then also talking to AI and merging those two. Because what a travel planner would have is, here's some practical experience, and I've seen lots of patterns in families. So more the human side. And then the technical side was like, okay, like why am I resisting planning vacations and like processing through that? And I love like sometimes like an issue with your spouse or loved one's a great one to talk this through because then you don't need to bother them, but like you kind of process out your rough edges first.
Yes.
Then you can come very simple and it takes less effort on their nervous system when you're like, oh, I was thinking of these three things and how would that sound? And you've already thought it through. And it's like, oh, thank you for making my job easy.
Our spouses are just crazy for how much the relationship is. I totally agree. I have personal experience with that. And you're right. With all those things, you mentioned coaching and charging. You could do a competitive market analysis. I love to recommend it to people that you just say, do a competitive market analysis of, when you put in your website or you describe your business and even include pricing suggestions and it may not be your final price. It may not be perfect, but it gets that conversation going.
I love doing too is if any time I feel like, because I don't know if it's ADHD or autism, I just know some of these patterns run in my family. I love going, well, how would someone with ADHD or autism deal with this? And it's interesting to see some of the creative ways that the approach is. Like I said, how to help ADHD and neurodivergent person with trouble doing exercise in the morning because I get bored
Yeah.
and or I'm just like I want some mental stimulation. I don't want exercise. I want to learn something or like so it says, well, prepare the night before, create structure and cues, make it rewarding, adjust your energy and focus, time it right, movement snacks, novelty, gamify it, make your environment more clutter free and inspiring. And that one was like hit it on the head. I was like, yes, I got to have this inspiring exercise environment. Music really helps me. And then it says self compassion, acknowledge struggles without judgment, frame exercise as act of self care, not obligation. That one's huge because so many things about shoulds were obligations, not an act of self care or act of empowerment.
Oh, wow. That really
And
helped me because I was just wondering about that myself. So thank you. That's a beautiful one. Absolutely. Because when we're habit stacking, especially, we think on the one hand, okay, I'm really engineering the perfect life for me. But then another side of me goes, but then am I going to be like loading myself up with all these hard tasks that I have to do? And am I going to be like taking out all the fun? It's not- But when you say, no, if I reframe each one as an act of self care, then I'll go, no, no, this is me just loving myself and having a good time.
one thing I learned recently was we each have a parent and we each have a child inside of us. And neither of them can be neglected or ignored without you not feeling great.
That's cool.
And so it kind of has in Christianity, they talk about the Father and the Son, and
Yeah.
Christ embodies both of those. Well, if you look at metaphorically or symbolically, that's saying you need the responsible part of you that like
Yeah.
pays the bills and does things and plans activities, but that adult can still be an adult and have friendships and do things. And
Yeah.
the kid needs to have joy and creativity and freedom, but they also need occasionally some chores, right? And some
Yes.
challenges. And I think what I learned was I wrote an article about this ADHD and autism and joy. One's like the train and one's like the fuel that goes in the train. Your child is like that fuel that goes in the train. But if you have no container, that's just dynamite without the stabilizing ingredient.
Yeah.
Right. And the adults like the stabilizing ingredient, right? And it's like the train on the tracks, and all right, we got things going. But together, it's a train ride.
And it reminds me of what I often taught with photography.
Yeah.
Creativity isn't just this wild thing that you go and just do anything. There are guidelines, there are rules, there's structure. And when you add constraints to creativity, that's when it really skyrockets.
Yeah. And so I think finding that joy in a force moving it forward, right?
Yes.
AI helped me to only enhance that. And I came up with that metaphor that I just shared. And then I shared it with someone. They loved the article. I love how whenever I get stuck in a story or belief, like the one I shared with our blog article and change your clothes, they're like beliefs
Yes.
and you can try them on. I'm like, that is such an amazing idea. I had two people in the same week help me, challenged me, like, I think that's just your belief. And I'm like, what?
It's part of my reality. I can take it.
I think you could try on a different belief. And I'm like, wait, what? And he was being very genuine and honest, like, I don't think that's true. I think you could live in a different space. And I'm like, thinking very logical, like, well, you got to do this. So the energy or the feeling, you can try them on like clothes. Not everything's a box and not everything is electrical component. Some things are more like you got to feel it and you got to experience it.
Yeah, exactly. Some things are the floppy disk that you put in.
Man, right in there.
Exactly.
You got like the coffee cup holder and you push the button, it says 4X DVD and it comes out and you're like CD-ROM. You're like, that's a coffee cup holder, right?
All right, I have two final questions for you.
Okay, final questions.
What's the weirdest thing that you've ever used AI to do, Ben?
Weirdest thing.
Yeah, what's few weird things that you think? And was it useful or just for laughs?
Well, okay, so I did personality jokes. I did these jokes about different personality types. And I did one for INFJs that made my life laugh so hard. And it was something like an INFJ walks in the forest and sees a squirrel and these beautiful trees, and then the squirrel like says something, and they're like, "Man, that's a judgy squirrel." And it was just so, and it never came up again. We tried to regenerate it, never showed up again. We're like, "What was that joke? What have those words?" And it would like made such a memory because it was just so out there and different. We could never recreate it.
Oh, that's great. I have an INFJ wife as well. I totally get it, even the essence of what you just talked about.
I totally trusted AI one day. I'm like, I don't know if I should trust AI with this. I'm like, I need a recipe for something curry and give it to me. And I just blindly followed it. And I'm like, well, I hope it turns out good, doesn't kill us. And it tasted great. And I was like, okay. Because, sometimes there's some things like I wouldn't want to ask AI, like, well, how do you fix a rocket engine in a homemade satellite? I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I trust that. But, cooking it works great. That was fun. Oh, here's a weird one maybe for other people. For me, it's totally normal. And so you can have memory. And I started adding a lot of interesting things into my memory. And so if I go to manage here, I added my custom framework for how I look at spirituality and business.
Awesome.
I added a custom framework for spiritual symbols to me that help me think through a problem.
Oh, that's really cool.
I also added 3 or 4 different coaches or people I follow, took the essence and put it in my memory. So then I can say, use my 4 orders pattern. And then it goes blah, 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 and talks in a way that makes sense to me.
That's so cool.
And so anytime I'm just like, how do you put it into my pattern or my lingo? It's like, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh yeah, I get it now. And then I shared that with somebody on our last coaching call. And they're just, that makes so much more sense. Thank you. So
those are really cool. And for those listening or watching in ChatGPT, you can add instructions. That's one level. But there's this whole other thing where you can put in your memories, like what Ben was talking about. So I've never heard of anybody doing that.
Oh, and my favorite weird one, when I generate lists, I love emojis.
Yeah. True.
So I'm like, give me a nice list with cool emojis in there, and they're just perfectly placed. And I love that. And then the other tool that's really, really helpful, because I make lots of lists, and like when I write data or information or journal, it's more free form. It's not organized, and I don't want to spend like half an hour or an hour like, oh, okay, that fits here, that goes here. So when I have a big bullet list of blah, I just say, please organize this in the most logical fashion. They go, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, get rid of duplicates and like extraneous things. And I'm like, that's what I was trying to say.
Exactly. You're inspiring me. I have all these ideas coming in my head, like, oh, I can add emojis to this.
So if you're an intuitive type person, that means you use your intuition a lot. You tend to be more to this convergent and divergent. You're more convergent, I think, which is, or no, divergent. Convergence like focus on one's point. Divergence like let's think about everything.
Yes.
And so part of like ADHD and intuition, there's this pattern where you're like you're just taking in everything. So no wonder your nervous system gets overwhelmed.
Right.
But part of that is you're also more creative. And so what you can do to help your nervous system not get overloaded, but still be creative because you like to be and you're good at it,
Yeah.
is to use AI to help you kind of funnel that in. And for the other type of person, it's like, I'm very focused and like, creative idea. This is what I always do. What else is there? Like, oh, it can help you open you up a little more.
That's really cool. You're right. That actually could be a really good work that you could dive into is, depending on what personality type you are,
Yeah.
how should you really approach this? Are you looking for prompts that will expand your creativity or ones that will focus your wild uniqueness?
Yes. And so as you were saying something that triggered this thought about being creative, what was that? You were saying, okay, so wild creativity, right? And you're just like on the range roaming,
Yeah.
but you're trying to figure out where your cattle are, right? Or your sheep, and you're
Right.
trying to gather them. At the end of the day,
I'm
that's,
trying to figure out, am I even a cattle rancher?
yeah, you're even a cattle rancher. Maybe
Who am I?
you're a cat rancher and you're trying to wrangle cats.
Yeah.
That's even harder. Then you have an identity crisis as you're out there on your horse, right? And I think what I loved is something I've adopted lately is joy containers.
Cool. Tell me more.
So if you want to have more joy and more light, it needs a container. And that container, you can choose to just shine it like a lamp or shine it like a flashlight. But if you want laser energy and laser joy, you're going to need to contain that and shape it. Otherwise, you're leaking all that energy and that light and that joy. And so I think AI can help us create joy containers, right? So you have some gifts, but if you didn't have a way to contain that, every time you put more good in there, it's just and you're just endlessly like, I got more good. Oh, where'd it go? Oh, I got more good. Oh, where'd it go? And so we need ways to contain that joy, whether it's emotional or intellectual or in our relationships.
Yeah.
And so I think AI can help us create those joy containers, whatever those parameters are for your joy.
I love that. And it could be the name of a great band, the Joy.
Yes, yes. Europe, joy
Yeah.
containers,
Tour, 2026 tour. All right. Final question for you, and this may be full circle. This is the first time that it might go full circle, but I always like to end by asking if you could go back in time and talk to your 10-year-old self and show your 10-year-old self AI, what do you think they would think of it?
Oh my goodness. He'd be like, no more headaches during writing class. I love English again. I think that'd be the first one. I think the second one would be like, oh, this is how you talk to girls. Or maybe another one would be, I think, helping me understand feelings. I think there's a lot of things I didn't understand about feelings
Right.
and how to, like, I would have had a Tony AI bot that would be like, let me help you today with your feelings, 10-year-old Ben. I'm like, thank you so much, Tony AI bot. And
you might just like describe it in the best way that you could, and it would say, oh, well, you're feeling X.
yeah. And I think one thing that's been very powerful for me, I wish I had when I was younger, was when you know the process, you're going through something difficult or change or confusing or some feeling, and you don't know the process, it
Mhm.
feels very uncertain, very out of control.
Right.
In the moment, I'm in a process like, oh, I'm going through this sad time or this difficult time. But over here is when you grow or you get the benefit, like you're weightlifting. Oh, and this is what's going to happen. You're like, oh, okay. It's just part of the process. So that feeling isn't bad or good. It, and you know that you're going to go through it.
Oh,
And I think when you can see that model or like, this is the process I'm going through, you can suddenly like kind of relax and go, I can accept this part and I can accept this part. And I wish I had that sooner because it just you can keep going forward without wasting so much energy and discouragement.
that is so true. You get to really know the pattern. I love that. Your 10-year-old self would love that.
Yeah, I see what
15-year-old self is loving it.
I think just the fun. Like it's just fun.
It'd be like the ultimate game, right? It would be like when I was 10 or 12, they had a text-based game on the computer, the little green font. And there was a text game where it would say, like, you're now approaching the wizard. What do you want to do with? And I loved it so much. And that's the kind of thing, this is like that times a billion. So it would be a great fun game.
Uh, That makes me think of like a Zelda game, but it's all like terminal.
Yes, exactly. That's what it was like.
Yes, the Choose Your Own Adventures was one book I found that I loved, and I sometimes would like look at the other ones, like, well, what happens over here? Well, what happens over here? Like, and I was just like, I almost wanted to like cheat it or read it backwards. I'm like, I could do that or that, but I hated the idea. Like, I committed. Oh, what's gonna happen?
Act. Yeah, you kind of peek ahead a little bit this way about listening or watching. If you happen to know that text-based game, let me know. Put it in the chat. Ben, it's been such a joy talking with you. The little kid in me is delighted. You're so fun to talk to about this and definitely like so inspiring. And I just know that people watching, listening are going to be able to be like, okay, if I've been resisting, I could try ChatGPT. Or maybe now's the time to try our Google Notebook LM or whatever it is. Will you come back in the future? Let's do this again.
Definitely.
Awesome. Awesome. So, everybody watching and listening, have fun playing. And I am going to be doing a webinar January 28th and 29th, 1 hour each day, free webinar. So, come and actually see these things being demonstrated. I encourage you, I'll put a little link to register down below. And in the meantime, just have fun playing with AI in every possible way. If you need more, click on the next video. I'll tell you a little bit more about this in the next video. In the meantime, have fun. AI is as easy as pie. Now we're cooking. Let's have some fun.
It's yeah.